Hello there guys and welcome back to the channel. Right, so we're gonna be breaking down another champion class in Marvel Construct Champions, and we have already done 4 full breakdowns of tech, skill, mystic and cosmic classes. Right, we have science and mutant classes left, and today we're gonna be taking a look at science class, and this one was actually fairly tricky to make. But right, so once more we're gonna be using the help of Aunt May's website. As we can see, Science class is one of the two smallest classes in game alongside Mystic with 30 champions only. So hopefully we do see some more Science champions in relatively close future. However, these 30 champions do consist of 21 hero champions, 9 villain champions, and 1 mercenary champion. There is one champion that is double playing in 2 different tags. Can you guess which one it is? When you do check it or find it out or realize which champion it is, it's going to make perfect sense though, I must tell you that. Right, Science class is not actually filled with bleed immune champions. There are only 2 bleed immune champions in Science class. However, there are a couple more champions that can deal with bleed abilities via some other effects. On top of that, there are 6 fully poison immune champions and 2 champions that you think are poison immune but technically aren't, even though they work as if they were. And that would be Immortal Abomination and obviously also Red Hulk. Right, so there are about 8 poison immune champions, which is a fairly high amount for a class that small. In general, one of the things that I do like about science class is that they pretty much house every single immunity in there. We have several champions that are incinerate immune fully, like Void, and we have Red Hulk, who is basically incinerate immune, and we have Human Torch also incinerate immune. Then we have Thing and Electro, who are shock immune, and only thing that science class does not have at all is cold snap immunity. Never realized it before, but yes, science champions, not a single one of them are fully cold snap immune. Right. However, on the flip side, science champions are the only champions in game pretty much that can deal with active or passive degeneration effects better than most. Now we have Gladiator Hulk, who is fairly unique with his face me mechanic, but recently we have gotten additions of Immortal Hulk and also the Spider Piggy. And both of them actually do interact with degeneration relatively well, especially Spider Ham, who can significantly mitigate degeneration, active or passive damage dealt to him. Right, another interesting fact about Science class is that Science class has the largest amount of extra large champions in game 10. I guess it kind of makes sense because, big scary science monsters, hulks and abominations and alike. If you can guess which class has the least amount of extra large champions in the game, I bet you will not easily figure that one out. Unless you obviously check, in that case, it's fairly rudimentary. There is another quite interesting thing. 2017 was by far the worst year for science class in general because we only got one champion added, and that was Modok. So basically, Kabam fell out of love with science class in 2017, and they only released Modok. That was quite a painful year. Either way, since 2018, pretty much every other, not every other actually, I wanted to flip this out around. Since 2018, pretty much every science champion has been relatively useful and relatively meaningful. Like in the last Cosmic video, I was going over Cosmic release schedule, and I said that about 4 out of 5 Cosmic champions released in the last 3 years have been duds, or last 4 years. Then Science is a bit of an opposite picture. 4 out of 5 champions released are typically at least relatively useful. You can see that we have last 4 champions from 2020. We have Spider-Ham, Red Guardian, Immortal, Hulk, and Immortal Abomination. And once again, majority of these champions actually matter and can do something worthwhile in the game. 2019 was the year of Fantastic Four, and again, 3 out of 4 Fantastic Four members have relevance in the metagame. 2019 is fairly similar, 5 champions being released, with Captain America, Infinity War, Gladiator, Hulk, Void, and Wasp, and Sentry being the only dud. So typically, Kabam has been doing quite a good job releasing science champions in the game in the recent years. But right, let's go over to the strong sides of the science class in general. And the first thing that I think comes to mind when anyone thinks about science class, and that is debuffs, utility debuffs. And the way I prefer to look at science class is let's say, a parallel universe version of Mystic class, where Mystic champions deal with opponents' buffs and status effects by nullifying them, by staggering them, by power controlling them flat out with their own power control methods. Science class at large deals with effects of those buffs. So if Mystic class kind of chips out things in their root, then Science class just deals with the aftermath of things that are meant to happen once effects have taken place. And I like that better in most cases, because quite often, obviously, abilities do not trigger via specific buff. Quite often those are champion abilities. Quite often they can be passives, and so on and so forth. Therefore, I kind of prefer the way science champions are able to tackle fights. And overall, I believe science class has probably the broadest access to utility debuffs. They can access the slow, petrify, armor breaks, fatigue, weakness, concussion, power sting, fatigue, and a whole bunch of different things. Siphon and suppression and underweight, and yeah, basically all of the coolest debuffs that let you make the fight easier are pretty much housed in science class. They have the highest amount of slow champions, and they do whatever they are setting out to do extremely potently. So that is the first thing. They do have access to a ton of utility debuffs. Obviously, they also have debuffs that do damage over time and so on and so forth, but most importantly are these status non-damaging debuffs that they can use extremely well. The second strong side of science class, in my personal opinion, is that practicality. Unlike many other champions released recently, and thank God so far we haven't had any science champions released in 2021, science champion ability descriptions are not like Bibles for most of the time. They're relatively straightforward and down to the point with a couple of exceptions. A perfect example would be Red Hulk. Red Hulk is very, very basic champion, but he just seems to work for whatever you want to use him. Why? Because it's simple. He doesn't rely on debuffs, he doesn't rely on buffs, and he managed to split his damage in between two similar sources, and it works. His immunities plus the way he functions and quick damage ramp up puts enough work. Similarly, same to Human Torch. Human Torch is a relatively straightforward champion, and half of his abilities are pretty much irrelevant. You know what you want to do with Human Torch, you don't have to use special attacks, you just want to get some smolders up and inflict incinerates, and you're good to go. And that can be said for a ton of different champions, and even they do have longer descriptions, they have straightforward, simple playstyles, like Void. Throw level ones. If you can't throw level ones, that's fine. The fight's still gonna happen pretty much the same. It's just gonna happen slower, right? You don't have to throw level 2, dance in the full moon, dash back 7 times, do 7 parries, intercept opponent twice, and then activate down, left, down, up, right in order to get some sort of status effect. Whatever science champions do, it's fairly relatively easily accessible, and as a class as a whole, I think they are managing to transfer their abilities the best from paper to the actual fight, where you feel like you can access those abilities. And therefore, in most fighting scenarios, you can actually use science champions, like you know what you're doing. And that is really important. It doesn't matter if a champion like Jubilee has 50 abilities. If they're not potent enough, they're not accessible easily enough, they just don't matter. Rather, champion have 3 abilities, but good ones and simple ones. And the third strength overall, I somewhat started going in that direction, is that I believe that science class is one of the 2 classes with the widest reach overall. The class itself was fairly difficult to define because they do so many different things so well. As I mentioned before, they have all of these status utility debuffs. They are probably the class that deals with Unstoppable the best. They are a class that can very well deal with ability accuracy reduction. They can power control or heal control opponents with petrified debuffs. And overall, if I would personally have to pick one single class to play the game with, it's probably going to be Science. Obviously, even though mutant champions seem to be getting more and more buffed, and it's very hard to fight against mutant class, I do still believe that if you put mutant and science class neck by neck, science class would probably be able to finish more content by themselves. Largely, obviously, thanks to Quake, Captain America, Infinity War, Void, and some of the other best STS champions. But even their middle of the pack champions have typically some unique traits that are readily available. So I do believe that is one of the science class strong science is how wide the reach is in terms of how they're able to deliver the damage, whether that would be like Mr. Fantastic or Void with passive damage over time ability, damage over time effects with Immortal Abomination and Human Torch, power stings with Mr. Fantastic's energy, Yellow Jacket, or Spider Ham, or just brute force damage like She-Hulk, or energy damage like Red Hulk. There are always options how to get where you're going if you use a science champion. So that is what I value extremely highly. Right, let's move on to the weak sides of science class. Number one is quite obvious. They pretty much all of them, with couple of exceptions, are quite reliant to debuffs. And obviously, Quake can deal with debuff immune fights, Red Hulk can deal with debuff immune fights, and let's say to a degree, She-Hulk can deal with debuff immune fights. But that's kind of there about it. Let's say Human Torch once per quest. And the rest of them, though, do pretty much depend on being able to debuff the opponent. And therefore, the more and more common debuff immunity nodes or tenacity nodes and abilities are actively hindering and hurting science class, where their role in MCOC seemingly is going to go down a bit. Especially with how actively Kabam is jacking up skill class. Now we have Daredevil Hell's Kitchen, now we have Kingpin, now we have Crossbones, and obviously we already had Elsa, we already had Taskmaster, we already had, I don't know, Nick Fury, and a bunch of other skill champions that are able to shrug off all the debuffs. Agent Venom. And tenacity nodes themselves are becoming more and more common in the quests. And if you're unable to land your debuffs to control the status effects, then that heavily counters science class. So that is their weakness at the moment, I believe. Second weakness is that almost all of the science champions have fairly crap damage arc. And what I mean by damage arc is that pretty much most of the other classes have, at the very least, a handful of champions who can either start out fights with a relatively good and high damage or get there very, very quickly. Science class doesn't really have many champions like that. Yes, there is Red Hulk, who can ramp up his damage relatively quickly compared, and then there's Wasp with guaranteed crits and heavy attack, and then, I don't know, to a degree, Luke Cage or Immortal Hulk. But most of the science champions really have fairly long damage cycle, where you either need, in Immortal Abomination's case, you need to get to your level 2, only then you can start inflicting your poisons. When eventually you get to acid burn, that is when you start dealing damage, and that is quite long time. And many fights should be over by that, or could be over by that if you use other champions. Similarly with Human Torch. Now, Human Torch can obviously do fantastic damage, but even against some champions who occasionally throw energy attacks, whilst you get the decent good amount of smolders, you're not really going to be hitting all that hard. Void is another example where you start out very, very slowly, dealing hardly any damage, and then you ramp it up. And then we have She-Hulk, and then we have Red Guardian, and then we have Captain America Infinity War, where you need to get your kinetic charges in order to do more damage. And in general, there are very, very few science champions that can just go and quest. And that is making them, well, quite frankly, less popular than they could or should be. Because why would you bring in Immortal Abomination in a random casual quest, I don't know, uncollected difficulty, if you can bring in Ghost Omega Red Corvus and be done with the fight by the time you reach level 1, let alone having Immortal Abomination reach level 2, drop the level 2, wait a moment, activate the level 1 in order not to lose your aura, and then kill opponent. So unfortunately, they do not have many kind of like express damage delivery champion, which just quite frankly make them less popular. It does make them less good in most situations, but it makes them less popular, which is unfortunately not a great thing. Also, another thing that definitely is a weakness of science class in general, in my personal opinion, is the fact that science class is the only class that where majority of the champions have been released in 2015 and 2016. That's right, you can literally go and check out every other class, and what does that mean? That means that they released a lot of science champions early, and most of them are outdated. And then 2017 we had one science champion. We haven't had any science champion so far in 2021. Rest of the years in the middle were about average, but considering the fact that science is the smallest class in the game and that there are that many champions that are quite honestly relatively outdated, unfortunately makes it so that science class depends on relatively few amount of champions total. Now, I do not think science class is as top heavy, so to speak, as cosmic classes, because there are definitely more great and amazing science champions that in many other classes. But at the same time, there is a very big bottom pile of relatively useless science champions like Ant-Man's, like Captain America's here. Even Electro is not all that, right? So we have Joe Fixit, then we have Rhino, and then we have OG Spidey, Miles Morales. Now, the saving grace obviously is the buff program, but quite honestly, just looking at the numbers themselves, I think that science class, well, needs it quite a bit. Because yes, we can see that in the years 2017, 18, 19, 20, and 21, so in last 5 years, we have gotten less science champions than in the first 2. That also, however, means that in the year 2016, science class was the biggest class in the game, I believe. Anyways, let's move on to some of the best qualities and best uses for the science class and some of the MVPs. Well, like, okay, so let's go over MVPs first. So obviously we have Quake, we have Captain America Infinity War, Human Torch, Void, Immortal Abomination, She-Hulk Thing, and even more. Like even Spider-Gwen, Spider-Ham are very fantastic champions. Wasp is very undervalued. I think Yellow Jacket is somewhere undervalued. Mortal Hulk can have its use, obviously Glade Hulk. So overall, Science class definitely does have quite a lot to offer, and ranking up champions in Science class is never really an easy decision to make. Overall, also, Science class is the most impactful class in competitive game modes. Believe it or not, Science class is the second most popular class in Alliance Quest, behind Cosmic class, only because of Corvus Glaive. Corvus Glaive alone beat pretty much every other class. And then on top of that, Science class is pretty much one of, if not the most popular class in Alliance Wars, largely thanks to Quake and She-Hulk, sorry, Quake and Human Torch, but we also have obviously other relatively good, great additions. So Science class averages out in my head as pretty much the most important class for competitive play. So, and the reason for that is because Science class has the best specialist. Like when you need to kill a Mystic champion, typically Human Torch is not going to be one of the better options. It's going to be the best option. When you need to deal with the insane amounts of heal, Captain America, Infinity War, Void, or Human Torch will be the best answers for those fights because you can reverse and do extra amounts of damage. Obviously, Quake is pretty much the best option for any fight that she can fight in. And then again, we have stuff like EMP modification, brute force, things where only Red Guardian has that unique immunity to buffs. And in general, that is one of the aspects of Science class where they're not as tricky to use and maybe not have as many different convoluted, complicated ability sheets. but whatever they do best, and that is why I like science class. That's why I absolutely love science class. And last little bit of tip or tricks before I leave. Science class has actually very interesting relationship with Mystic class. So obviously on top of having class advantage against Mystic champions have built-in weaknesses against specific debuffs. For instance, very comic accurate interaction would be Mr. Fantastic, who is able to provide pre-fight ability for any of his teammates, is able to give any of your champions Petrify. And why is it important? Because if you jump to the Mystic class and take a look at little Dr. Princess Doom over here, you can notice that he can't activate his Aura of Hatharath if he has slower Petrify debuff. So effectively, Mr. Fantastic can make any champion extremely good against Dr. Doom by making sure that Dr. Doom can't activate Petrify. Similar interactions go for most of the newer Mystic champions in general, like Mordo cannot evade whilst he's stunned if he's under effect of concussion or fatigue. So let's say Luke Cage can easily just go and smack Mordo and parry and keep on attacking, and there will be no problems, or any other champions that can fatigue or concuss the opponents. Then we have Sasquatch, and many people are overlooking this fact. So where is that hairy little mother flipper? Actually pulled him recently. Sasquatch cannot generate his Great Tannerak charges if he's under effect of end weight or exhaustion. So let's say Spider-Gwen is a perfect counter, and you will never ever have to deal with his Wrath of Tannerak mode, and he will not be able to properly mitigate incoming damage because he will not be gaining Wrath of Tannerak charges. Another thing, and this is perhaps a little bit less when you're fighting against Tigra, but when you are using Tigra is unable to use her miss mechanic if she has either weakness, slow exhaustion, debuffs active on her. So if you are afflicted with weakness, let's say because of long distance relationship, unfortunately can't use that miss mechanic. It's just something to remember at times. And again, Dragon Man has a specific weakness built in against science champions. For whenever he is inflicted with a non-damaging debuff, you pause his cooldown of when he's getting his power gain buff by 0.35 seconds. So if you spam a lot of debuffs, he will not be gaining his power gain buff for majority of the time, for a longer amount of time. Anyways, I just find it interesting because it kind of like fits the idea perfectly, where you have these utility debuffs, you have class advantage, and then a lot of science champions actually lose a lot of mystic champions actually lose a lot of their abilities when they're inflicted with specific debuffs. And if nothing else, then do remember that Mr. Fantastic can completely shut down Dr. Doom's aura for any champion that you do decide to use. Right, that is it, and yeah, I'm gonna catch you guys soon. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. See ya! Hello there guys, and welcome back to the channel. So we have all